Hello everyone, and welcome back to Game Easy, Roll Good. Today we're going to focus on the spell Contagion. I covered this a little bit in my spell changes to the 5th level spells video. I covered all the changes to all the spells in the Dungeons & Dragons 2024 Player's Handbook. I have a playlist on my channel if you want to go check all those out. The vast majority of spells were touched in some way. Some of them are just like small material components changes, some are small wording changes, but Contagion was one of those spells, even in 2014, that was always a very unique spell. And based on the changes to it in 2024, I think it's even more unique in the way. It's still very similar to the way that it was before, but there are some interesting word choices that Wizards of the Coast used this time that I really feel makes it function a little bit differently. But before we get started with that, if you're a new viewer to this channel or a returning viewer to this channel and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, consider hitting that subscribe button either now or at some point during this video if you like what you see and you want to see more. But yeah, I do want to talk about Contagion. And before I get started, I do want to say that, having gone through all the spells and read through all the spell descriptions, in general, I do feel like Wizards of the Coast does make an effort to choose very specific language when they're making rules, especially for spell rules and other rules like that. And in 2024, I do believe that they've done a better job at using consistent language, like we saw initially with the spell Armor of Agathis, where it says you maintain the effects of the spell so long as you have temporary hit points, whereas previously it was the temporary hit points from that spell. And initially players were kind of taken aback by this and thought maybe something was wrong. Then as we saw with spells like Polymorph and other spells that grant temporary hit points and have persistent effects, they all have that same language. So if it was on one spell, maybe it was an accident, but if it's on multiple spells, or if we can compare it to multiple spells, it seems a little bit more intentional that way. And so not only do I like to give Wizards of the Coast the benefit of the doubt that they know what they're doing when they make certain changes, but in general, like I've said sort of in the past, if you've watched my videos for a while, I do like to err on the sides of things being more functional rather than less functional. But as we'll look at in a moment, the 2014 version of Contagion was kind of not a great spell, whereas if we read it the way that it is written in 2024, it is a much more useful spell in certain situations for sure. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll look at the 2014 version of Contagion first and kind of pull out the key points that we want to focus on. So here's the text of Contagion in 2014. So the big thing here is that the old Contagion started with a melee spell attack against a creature within your reach. It is a touch spell. It is still a touch spell in 2024. So you make a melee spell attack. On a hit, the target is poisoned. And then on that creature's turn, they continue to make saving throws against the spell. If they fail 3 saving throws before they succeed 3 saving throws, then they are permanently affected by the spell. So let's cover things in a little bit more detail. So first things first, in order to make the follow-up saving throws, the target must be poisoned by the initial spell attack roll. So you cast the spell, you make a melee spell attack as part of the casting of that spell. On a hit, the creature is poisoned. On a miss, they are not poisoned and they are not affected by anything else affected by the spell, because if the initial attack misses, the creature isn't poisoned. And in order to make the subsequent saving throws, it says at the end of each of the poisoned target's turn, right? Another thing to note here is that there are 2 effects of this spell. The initial effect in the 2014 version, at least, is the poison on hit. So you hit them with this melee spell attack. They are poisoned if they are not immune to poison, of course. And if they are immune to poison, then you just can't use the spell, basically, because it doesn't do anything to them. But on a hit, they are poisoned. If they fail the 3 Constitution saving throws before they succeed 3 Constitution saving throws, then the poison effect is removed, and then they are affected by a disease. And then that disease imposes one of the following effects that you see at the bottom of the spell. And speaking of those effects at the bottom of the spell, the persistent effects of the spell only take effect after the target fails 3 times. This is different than it works in 2024, but in addition to having disadvantage on certain checks, there's also additional riders for, like, if they have disadvantage on wisdom, they're also blinded. If they have disadvantage on strength, they also have disadvantage on strength saving throws and attack rolls and everything using strength. So there's all these different rider effects on these, but they simplified this quite a bit in 2024. So this spell was considered bad in 2014 for a number of reasons, one of which is that if you miss with the spell attack, then you just wasted your 5th level slot because nothing else happens. 2, it is a Constitution saving throw, which is historically one of the higher saving throws among monsters in the monster manual. And 3, it inflicts the poisoned condition, which of course, as we've discussed in the past, is the single highest condition immunity in the game. So there were just whole swaths of creatures that the spell couldn't affect. And if you only have certain spells that you can choose, you're unlikely to choose a spell that only affects a very small number of targets. But how does this work in 2024 if we don't quite remember from my video before? So let's review that. So in 2024, we can see this is a much shorter spell. They kind of condensed everything quite a bit. It is still basically the same spell, but it has some very important wording changes as well as just kind of functional changes. So for starters, we can see that the spell does still have 2 different effects. It says at the very beginning, your touch inflicts a magical contagion. Magical contagion, it isn't in the player's handbook. There is a section in the Dungeon Master's Guide for magical contagions, and they have example contagions that you can use in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So this is what is sort of taking the place of disease. You know, disease was removed in 2024, as many of us know already. If especially been watching my videos, I mention it every time disease comes up. But this is a specific thing that exists in the game. They're not just using flowery language to say magical contagion. It is a thing. In addition to that, if they fail the initial saving throw, they're then poisoned by contagion. We can also see now that this spell is just a Constitution saving throw. There's no melee spell attack associated with it. So you cast the spell, you still have to be within the range of touch, but then they just make a Constitution saving throw. And if they fail that saving throw, then they take 11d8 necrotic damage and have the poisoned condition. So unlike 2014, this spell now deals damage when they fail the saving throw, in addition to automatically applying the poison condition. Then, like I mentioned, there's an additional rider on the poisoned condition for the spell in 2024. Again, the poisoned condition on its own grants disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls. And then additionally, it says while poisoned, the target has disadvantage on saving throws made with the chosen ability. So you choose, strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. Whichever one you choose, they have disadvantage on saving throws for that ability. So then we move on to the second paragraph. And then the first sentence of the second paragraph is really the crux of what I think are the most interesting changes to the spell. So the first sentence says, the target must repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns until it gets 3 successes or failures. So the first thing that we want to look at here is that it says the target repeats the saving throw. It doesn't say the poisoned target. It doesn't say the affected target. It is just the target of the spell. Notably, in the first paragraph, there's no exit condition for the spell. It doesn't say on a success, the spell ends. We'll take a look at other example spells in a second that have very similar language and use much more specific language other than the old Contagion. We'll look at other spells in 2024 that use more specific language. But the second thing here is that it says the target must repeat the saving throw at the end of each of its turns until it gets 3 successes or failures. It doesn't say another saving throw. It doesn't say a saving throw. It says the saving throw. The article the is a definitive. So it is referring to something that the reader or listener is already aware of. And the thing that we're already aware of is the Constitution saving throw at the beginning of the spell, on which a failure means that they take 11d8 necrotic damage and have the poison condition. So reading the spell kind of as it is if you cast Contagion on a target, they make an initial saving throw, and whether they pass or fail, they continue making saving throws on each of their turns. Each time they fail a saving throw, they take 11d8 necrotic damage and have the poison condition. The poison condition wouldn't stack because it is the same spell, and spells don't stack that way. And the only escape clause for the spell is if they succeed 3 times, and then the spell ends. If the second paragraph said the poison target must repeat the saving throw, then for sure, if they succeeded the first saving throw, then they wouldn't continue making additional saves. But they removed that text, and it does take effort to remove text that feels intentional, right? And they could have just as easily left the old language in the spell where it says poisoned target must continue to make saves, but they didn't do that. They took that language out. So on the surface, that does seem pretty powerful. I mean, 11d8 necrotic damage is about 50 damage on average, at least. But again, this doesn't do like save for half. So if they make all 3 saving throws and they just take no damage. But again, this is a touch range spell, and touch range spells typically do more damage than spells with range. This is a Constitution saving throw, and spells with con saves typically have higher damage. Single target spells do more damage than non-single target spells. So the main balancing factor here that seems to be missing is concentration. There are other spells in the game that work similarly to Contagion, and we'll look at those in a second. Because one of the arguments against this interpretation of it was that Contagion ends if they succeed on the first save. And I'm going to say, no, it doesn't. It's probably the factor that I'm most confident about. So if we look at Flesh to Stone works almost identically to Contagion, other than the fact that it requires concentration, and it doesn't do damage when they fail the saving throw. So we look at Flesh to Stone. Unlike Contagion, it requires that the target be restrained in order to continue making those additional saving throws. This is the 2024 text of Flesh to Stone. So if they fail the initial Constitution saving throw, they are restrained for the duration. And then the second paragraph says a restrained target makes another Constitution saving throw. So if they succeed on the first saving throw, they are not restrained and they would not be subjected to the rest of the effects of the spell. Additionally, we can also see that it says another Constitution saving throw. It doesn't say a restrained target makes the Constitution saving throw at the end of each of its turns. So this is a different Constitution saving throw than the original. The second sort of critique of the way that I'm interpreting here is that Contagion only deals damage the first time. This is probably the one that's most up for debate. Let's look at a couple different spells here. So first we have Conjure Elemental. So for Conjure Elemental, the target makes an initial dexterity saving throw. If they fail it, they take 8d8 damage and have the restrained condition. And then on their turns, the restrained target repeats the saving throw. So it says the saving throw. However, there's a line right after that sort of changes the failure condition. So on a failed save, the restrained target then takes 4d8 damage instead of 8d8 damage. So we can see here that they took the time to specify that if they fail a saving throw, then something else happens. You don't follow the rules of the original save. And then the second spell that kind of works similarly as well that could be compared to is Phantasmal Killer. So in this situation, Phantasmal Killer, the second highlighted text here, it says failed save, it takes the psychic damage again from the original save. However, for the start of the second paragraph, it says for the duration, the target makes a wisdom saving throw at the end of each of its turns, not the wisdom saving throw. So they have to repeat that on a failed save, they would take the initial damage again because it's a new saving throw. It's not the same saving throw that they made initially. I understand the inclination to assume that other spells work the same way that other spells do, but I do think that, these little subtle wording changes kind of do mean different things. And whether or not it was actually intended by the game developers, they're welcome to make errata and make it say that, the poisoned target continues to make the saving throw or whatever it is. As Contagion is written currently, I am of the belief at least that they would continue making saving throws until they either fail 3 or save 3. And they would also, each time they fail the saving throw, continue taking that damage. And so talking about the damage, let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like for Contagion. So one thing to note that is important for Contagion is that it doesn't deal damage on a successful save. It is not save for half. So in a situation where a creature just succeeds on 3 saving throws and doesn't fail any, the spell just doesn't deal any damage. Contagion is a 5th level spell, so the earliest you have access to it is level 9. A caster who has maxed their spellcasting ability modifier by level 8 will have a save DC of at least 17. The con save bonus for monsters of CR 9 to 13, sort of in that range, in the 2014 Monster Manual at least, is +3. This can get as high as +9 to 11 in that range, but these are mostly creatures that you would expect to have a high con score, such as giants and dragons. I did try excluding constructs, elementals, and demons and devils, since those are typically immune to poison, although the average was still +3 no matter if you included them or excluded them. So the average damage for 11d8 is going to be 11 times 4.5, which is 49.5. This is up to an average of 148.5 damage if they fail 3 saving throws. That is quite a bit, but they are not guaranteed to take all of that damage. So if we start off by looking at the average saving throws in this level range, that is a +3 con save against a DC 17. That is a 65% chance of failure. So that is definitely in the player's favor. We can see that the probability of failing 0 times is 4.29%. Probability of failing only once is 11.15. The probability of failing only twice is 18.1. Probability of succeeding 0 times is 27.46. Probability of succeeding once is 38.45. Probability of succeeding twice is 33.64. Notably, these percentages aren't perfect. They don't add up to 100 perfectly because we are rolling anywhere from 3 to 5 times because we stop rolling after 3 successes or 3 failures. But if we add the percentages together, we get the total of 133.9. But then we can sort of readjust those percentages relative to that total. So we can see that there's a 3.22% chance that we deal no damage, an 8.38% chance to deal damage once, a 13.6% chance to deal damage twice, and a 74.8% chance to deal damage 3 times. So against a lower con score, unsurprisingly, we have a good chance to deal a lot of damage. Against a higher con score, of course, we have a good chance to deal not that much damage. So speaking of a high con score, what happens if we target a giant who has their +11 to their con save? It just so happens that the +11 is exactly the opposite of the +3 to their con save, so it is a 35% chance of failure rather than a 65% chance of failure. And if we calculate the percentages relative to that total, the chance of dealing no damage increases to 20.63%. The chance of dealing damage once is 28.9%. Chance of dealing damage twice is 25.28%. And the chance of dealing damage all 3 times and having the permanent effect of the spell is 25.2%. But that is almost a 75% chance that the spell will not take a permanent effect and will deal anywhere from 50 to 100 damage on average. And what I think this does demonstrate as far as this spell being kind of specifically powerful is that even with a high constitution save on the enemy, the spell has a pretty good chance to deal at least some damage. It has a pretty good chance to deal at least damage once, right? It's about an 80% chance that it at least does damage 1 time against a creature with a high con save. This doesn't even take into account if they fail the first saving throw and you give them disadvantage on their con saves, then they're more likely to continue failing the saving throws. These numbers don't reflect that. Likewise, they don't also reflect if the creature has magical resistance and has advantage on saving throws against spells and magical effects. Notably, this would be particularly good on a Divine Soul Sorcerer. Sorcerers don't normally have access to Contagion, but a Divine Soul Sorcerer has access to the Cleric spell list, and Clerics have access to Contagion. So with the new innate sorcery, the Sorceress Rage sort of thing, they can give themselves +1 to their save DC and make this more likely to fail. They can also use the heightened spell Meta Magic to give them disadvantage on all of their Constitution saving throws immediately rather than waiting for them to try to fail the saving throw. It's definitely good for that kind of sorcerer, but in general, what could we use Contagion for? What are the best use cases for a spell that works this way? First and foremost, I don't think Contagion is a spell that I necessarily use as my bread and butter. It is very good if we are reading it the way that I'm presenting it here. However, threatening an average of 50 damage every turn for several rounds, requiring no concentration or additional action beyond the first turn, is nothing to scoff at. It is a great way to challenge concentration if a creature is concentrating on a spell. Again, if they take an average of 50 damage, that's going to be a DC 25 concentration check. A creature with a high con score could make that, although they're very unlikely to. Additionally, if the creature is not immune to poison and they are a legendary creature with legendary resistances, this is probably a pretty good way to make them burn their legendary resistances, because not only would they take the damage from failing not only would they be poisoned and have disadvantage on all ability checks and attack rolls, but they would also have then disadvantage on whatever ability score you're targeting with the poison effect. So that's everything I wanted to say about Contagion. Again, I completely understand if people at least don't agree that they would take the damage on subsequent failures. I am pretty confident that they would continue making saving throws regardless, because again, it doesn't say the poisoned creature or the affected creature, and pretty much every other spell that has repeated saves does specify that, and there's no exit condition for succeeding on the first save otherwise. But you can definitely let me know that down in the comments below. One way or the other. I'm not trying to say, this is how you should play it or whatever. This is just the way that I read it, and I'd be interested in at least playing with it this way to get a real feel for it. But let me know what you think down in the comments. And again, while you're going down in those comments, please hit that like button. If you are a new or returning viewer to this channel and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, and you like what you saw here, you want to see more from me, you find me entertaining in some way, please hit that subscribe button. I release videos every Wednesday and Sunday, so you always have something to look forward to. I appreciate all your time, and I'll see you in the next one.